Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 48 of Diabetics for Diabetics Radio. Today's episode is titled Testosterone, IGF-1 and HGH, the hidden hormonal link to beta cell health. We're going to be talking all about those three main growth factors in the human body: testosterone, insulin growth factor 1 or IGF-1, and human growth hormone or HGH. And I learned a lot in putting this together about the way that these growth factors are influencing beta cell health. Everything from insulin sensitivity, all of the vitamins and minerals that go into stabilizing and regulating the systems that create these hormones, and vice versa on the opposite side of having diabetes, how the loss of insulin, the loss of the creation of insulin or the sensitivity to insulin really impacts our body's ability to use these growth factors. So I'm excited to get to talk about what all of this looks like in the pre-diabetic body as well as the diabetic body, and all of the ways that we're able to positively influence the stability of our ability to create these hormones and the resulting impacts on our beta cell health, our insulin sensitivity, our liver health, our gut health, all of it. We cover it all here. So I'm excited to get started. Let's go ahead. In this episode, we're going to talk about beta cells in healthy systems, how they're supposed to grow, what influences their growth, so that we can set a basis of comparison for what we're experiencing with type 1 diabetes. We'll go into the roles of testosterone, IGF-1, HGH, what they are, what they do, where they come from, the systems that they involve, and how they're impacting beta cells. And then we'll play with the timeline of type 1 diabetes and growth hormones or growth factors, and vice versa. I want to look at both sides of that timeline. Does type 1 diabetes lead to irregular hormones, or do irregular hormones lead to type 1 diabetes? And we'll talk about some of the factors that go into determining that. So let's first take a look at beta cell growth. So first, let's cover some quick tidbits to keep in our mind and some of the resulting questions that result from those as we look at the information coming up. So beta cells regenerate at relatively low rates. Remember, we're operating under the assumption that when we lose beta cells, they're essentially gone because they don't replicate fast enough or efficiently enough to make back what we're losing, right? It's always, no matter what we grow, it's always kind of one step forward, two steps back. And then growth hormones like IGF-1 and HGH influence beta cell differentiation, proliferation, and survival. And there's a difference between all three of those. Differentiation is making sure that whatever cells are in the pancreas is the proper amount of energy being given to them becoming beta cells as opposed to other cell types. Proliferation, the ability to regenerate, and then survival. Are the beta cells that are being made actually surviving, and is it sustainable? And then there have been some studies showing increased beta cell proliferation in response to IGF-1 in experimental models. So when you increase IGF-1 levels, it's improving beta cells' ability to regenerate. So when we turn that into questions and where we can kind of branch out from that, why does beta cell regeneration decline with age? And are there external ways to stimulate these growth pathways to reignite beta cell growth for those with type 1 diabetes? So this graph here on the right, this flow chart, is how I like to visualize how you go from basically a pancreatic stem cell and have it turn into an insulin-producing beta cell. And the pancreatic stem cells are cells with the potential to become any cell type: alpha, beta, ductal, acinar. It doesn't have to be endocrine or exocrine. It can be anything. It has the blueprints. It has the ability to become all of them. But dependent on the specific environmental factors like transcription factors, which are basically like the buttons controlling which blueprint gets selected and acted upon, then that determines the ensuing cascade of how everything becomes what it's destined to become. So with those baseline pancreatic progenitor cells, they're relying on the signals from PDX1, which is short for insulin promoter factor. That's its other name, insulin promoter factor. And it actually acts on both sides of the progenitor. So it's like in the development of the body, PDX1 ensures that cells go to the pancreas and a pancreas is actually formed. It also helps the progenitor cells, once they are pancreatic, turn into beta cells and are given the potential to create insulin. So you need PDX1 as a signal to be like, hey, listen, we're going to be in the pancreas. Once they're in the pancreas, okay, hey, listen, we're going to be beta cells. Then they're kind of like immature beta cells. They're in the gooey stages of, okay, we know it's going to be a beta cell, but in term, like, do we need a beta cell right now? Is this like an active beta cell? Is it a silent beta cell? This is where neuro G3 comes in. This is something that's going to give the beta cell the maturity. It's going to help the beta cell along to ensure that it is functional and on and able to produce everything that a beta cell is supposed to. And then you have your mature beta cells. And this is where NKX 6.1 comes in, because it is able to sustain this beta cell activity and make sure that it is acting accordingly to what the metabolism of the body is asking for. Okay. So, and a lot of it plays into, and this is why this is included in a growth hormone or a growth factor episode, is because puberty, physical development, those periods of high growth are times where insulin is needed more, right? Like in the development as a child, from like newborn to infant, from a child to an adolescent, there's a ton of hormonal movement, a ton of growth occurring on a massive scale. And for all of those things to happen, you need the players of insulin, testosterone, IGF-1, and HGH. So we have to be able to see human growth in sort of like cycles of high growth, not as much growth, high growth, not as much growth. And our organ, specifically the pancreas, needs to be able to adjust, right? Because it's not a matter of having beta cells that are so active all of the time. It's like if you're in a high growth period, you need more beta cells that are making more insulin. If you're not, you don't want too much insulin, right? So our body needs the ability to be able to turn switches on and off to meet the demands of the development of the body as a whole. And just a little bit more on these transcription factors. So PDX, this is establishing the lineage, right? It's telling those pancreas cells, okay, hey, listen, this is the blueprint that we're picking. This is the cascade that's going to result. Then you've got neuro G3. This is taking a pancreatic cell and being, hey, listen, we're going to be part of the endocrine, right? Alpha, beta, delta, epsilon, gamma, right? Any one of those, this is kind of where we're headed. And then you've got the NKX 6.1. This is the final push to make beta cells and making sure that they're the mature type that is able to make insulin. And you may be wondering, all right, how do they even know this? And the way it works, because I thought the same thing, what they'll do is in developing cells, they will create a way to knock these specific transcription factors out, right? So they'll make a cell that doesn't have any PDX1 or doesn't have any neuro-G3, and they'll see what results. And so when they knock out PDX1, there's no pancreas. Like the pancreas in the body doesn't even appear. So it's like, okay, PDX1 is part of making sure that whatever stem cells we have, they're getting the signal to be like, okay, we're going to be the pancreas. When they knock out neuro-G3, there's no endocrine cells. So you get the pancreas because you got the PDX1, but when it comes to deciding its fate to become endocrine cells, no endocrine cells. So that's kind of how they deduce what each of these does. And then when they knock out NKX 6.1, there's no beta cell function. So you have a pancreas, you have endocrine cells, you may even have beta cells, but they're not actually working, right? So these are each of kind of the gatekeepers at each of these steps of development. And then similar graph for looking at how beta cells fluctuate in their level of activity or their level of maturity, okay? And how that correlates with IGF-1, HGH, and testosterone. So again, and I think this may even be true for people with type 1 diabetes, and we'll touch on it later in the podcast as well. But this type 1 diabetes may be a factor or maybe a collection of both inflamed and broken or breaking and falling apart beta cells, but it also may be a silencing of okay beta cells, right? So it's not just a sheer like, oh, they're gone and never coming back. It's like, well, some may be falling apart, but for the ones that we do have, why aren't they producing? There's something kind of stopping their ability to make insulin. So with a resting beta cell, we're focusing over here on the right. Resting beta cells, low insulin demand, right? Lower. You can even think comparatively. You could think on the micro, like, have you eaten recently? No? Okay, less insulin demand. Could it be, well, I'm done with puberty, I'm a developed human body now? Okay, definitely need less insulin than I did when I was, becoming and growing into a mature adult. Less activity than before. When they become active, maybe eat a meal, or you're aging out of kind of that resting period and you're starting to enter a phase of accelerated growth. Okay, boom, beta cells get activated. You are increasing insulin secretion because of such high demand for growth. And then you have the beta cell regeneration, which is, okay, the demand is higher than the volume that we have. So we need to make more to meet demand. Stress, damage, okay, we're losing beta cells. That's a cue to rebuild new ones to restore. And, they've done experiments from like a physical injury. A lot of times when we think of a loss of beta cells, we just assume it's diabetic. There's something internal happening. But a lot of the times when they look into how beta cells regenerate, sometimes they'll just like cut out a slice of a mouse pancreas and see how it rebuilds. So there is a physical stress aspect to this as well, more so than not just a like chemical imbalance type way. So you've got the resting, you've got the active, and then you've got how do we make more out of that resting phase or out of that active phase. And that's where IGF-1, HGH, and testosterone come into play. So IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor, it is made and released from the liver. It's promoting beta cell proliferation and protects against apoptosis, which is cell death. So it's sustaining beta cells and giving them the ability to proliferate. Okay? Plays a huge part in regulating glucose metabolism in conjunction with insulin.
It's not a coincidence that it says insulin-like growth factor. Insulin is anabolic, right? It is for growth. It is for storage. It is for kind of building. So those two are, as the names would suggest, working together. Then you have HGH, human growth hormone. This originates from the pituitary gland, and this is a major player in stimulating and working with, synergizing with IGF-1. So, and again, we'll get into this more later, but IGF-1 helps HGH get the job, right? Like the HGH is the call for something to be done. IGF-1 is the one doing the work. And so kind of secondarily, like a little detached from the actual building itself, it's supporting beta cell survival and function by being the call to action for all of the things below it. And then you've got testosterone, which originates in the reproductive organs. Testes for males, ovaries for females. It's a lot more than a sex hormone. We'll talk about that in a little bit. It modulates inflammation. So higher testosterone levels mean less inflammation, and vice versa. Low testosterone levels means the potential for more inflammation, right? So it's a way of protecting beta cells from inflammatory sources. And in being growth oriented, it's enhancing the body's ability to make insulin, to grow, to take up glucose, and become more metabolically efficient.
So logically, yes, growth factors are going to impact beta cell growth, but it's cool to see the different transcription factors that kind of help funnel the potential of these pancreatic progenitor cells, the stem cells, if you will, and kind of funnel them into these insulin producing beta cells. And obviously, testosterone, IGF-1, and HGH are going to impact this funneling and progression into these finalized beta cell products. Now, in this next section, we're going to talk about the specific maturation of beta cells, because I believe it was episode 46, The Secret Life of Beta Cells, where we talked about not all beta cells being equal. There are brand new beta cells that aren't mature yet, but need to go through this maturation process to be able to do all of the things that we classically associate with beta cells. So let's talk a little bit more about that now.
Beta cells are not a constant, right? It's not like, oh, if I have a beta cell, it's just making insulin like nobody's business. No, there are on and off switches within beta cells. It's not like, oh, you flip the off switch and the beta cell's dead. It's like, no, it's just quiet. It's put away. And I believe I talked about this in the Secret Life of Beta Cells episode 46. The dream complex, and this is where this paper on the right comes from. The dream complex is a group of inhibitory proteins that keeps beta cells in a senescent state, a quiet state, where it's there, it's alive, but it's not actually producing insulin. And this particular paper was talking about natural compounds that could potentially deactivate that dream complex and allow for this growth. And again, I just want to reiterate how important this is, because it's not just about beta cell growth, it's about beta cell activation as well, beta cell health, and making sure that our body has all of the necessary symptoms for growth. Because plasticity, that kind of fluctuation between active, non-active, is going to be influenced by our nutrition. Right? Does our body have the natural, the raw materials to support life? And if it doesn't, wouldn't it make sense that our bodies would be like, hey, listen, we don't have the things we need to operate at full capacity, so I got to cut back. So it's not just like, oh, those beta cells are dead, I can't feed them, so I'm going to let them starve. It might just be, hey, shut them down, keep them quiet. When we get raw materials, we can start to turn them on again. The growth factors also happen to play a huge part in that, right? The IGF-1, the HGH, those are the signs for growth, right? Let's say we get those raw materials that we need to operate at full capacity. When we have that nutrition available, that's when those growth factors are like, hey, listen, let's flip the switch back on. Time to turn back on. We've got everything we need. And this coincides with the changes in metabolic demand of our natural life cycle. Newborn to infant, infant to toddler, you've got child to adolescent. During pregnancy, when you are making a new human inside of you, if you are obese and having an incredibly high metabolic demand to handle all of your food intake and the resulting hormonal cascades around that, those are all going to play a part in what beta cells are being told to do. So, like I mentioned, the beta cell regeneration, not a constant, right? They are incredibly intelligent in being able to alter their insulin production and regeneration rates based on the current metabolic demands and the resources available to them in order to do their job effectively. So when you consider this in the context of someone with type 1 diabetes, you have inflammation, how that's sourced, what the source of that inflammation is, may play a part in the resulting response for beta cells, but it could kill off beta cells. It could also deactivate them, and both dead and deactivated beta cells are not going to be able to regenerate to account for what's being lost, right? So you have to, there's a lot of things at play here, and it's a lot more, there's a lot more to it than what we're being told. And there's a lot more we can do about it to change it. So things we can think about: what's blocking the growth? Is there something like the dream complex that is saying, hey, listen, keeping you in the senescent state, not letting you make any new ones? And apart from the blockage, is there something that we can take to either knock the block away so that beta cells are able to receive the growth signals? Can we boost those growth signals so that when we take the blocks away, we're like, hey, listen, we got to get things going again. Send full steam ahead. When they grow, can we keep them alive? Do we have what it takes to make sure that we can have healthy cells that are able to do what they're supposed to do? Because if we regenerate all these brand new beta cells, but we don't have a way to keep them alive, or we just regenerate broken ones, that doesn't do us any good, right? So we need a way to make sure that everything is in alignment to ensure that nothing's in the way of growing. All of the growth signals are working effectively to make sure that what's grown is healthy and protected and sustainable. So let's actually start to talk about the hormones themselves. I keep saying that and then not actually talking about it. So we'll actually get into testosterone, IGF-1, HGH1 now. And this is just a quick little overview of where we're headed. I highlighted this discussion point because that's going to be one of the biggest takeaways I see from this discussion. Each one, in and of their own right, is very important and influential. But are these hormones interdependent in their roles within what we're asking them to do from the standpoint of glucose metabolism and beta cell health? And I'll just preface that with nothing in the body acts in isolation. So we really need to make sure that this is a team effort where we're not really over focusing on one more than the other, because they all play together.
So beta cells are incredible. They are incredibly plastic and adaptable in being able to adjust to the metabolic needs of the body, right? the more active you are, the more growth you're experiencing, the more you're going to need insulin. And opposite that, if you are not growing and not metabolizing a lot, the insulin decreases, right? So we kind of think like, oh, I need more beta cells because I need more insulin. But there's also the factor of, okay, you may have beta cells and they may just be quiet and not making insulin. So when from the diabetic state, we need to be thinking about, are do we have enough beta cells? Do we have enough active beta cells? What are the things blocking our insulin production? And if all of those things are in place, how do we remove those blocks? And what can we do to improve beta cell growth and then insulin secretion?
All right, so now let's take a closer look at the three major growth factors here in controlling metabolism and beta cell health. So you've got testosterone, you've got IGF-1 in the middle, and then you've got HGH on the right. So testosterone, more than a sex hormone. A lot of times we think of, T-boosting, artificial testosterone for older gentlemen, bodybuilders taking testosterone to build these big muscles. It does a lot more than that. So it's increasing our insulin sensitivity, right? Both insulin and testosterone are both anabolic. They want to grow. When you want to grow, you need your cells to be able to take in more glucose, make more energy to fuel all of those growth initiatives. So from the body perspective, we're increasing lean muscle mass. Lean muscle mass is more sensitive to insulin. It's going to improve its ability to use glucose metabolism. It's also going to reduce fat accumulation. Reduced fat reduces the amount of fat that's able to harbor toxins and things that can signal for more inflammation. Too many fat cells are important. Too many fat cells are dangerous, right? So I've got a little side note here. So cholesterol is a precursor to testosterone. So cholesterol turns into I don't remember. There's a couple intermediates between cholesterol and testosterone, but cholesterol is incredibly important in our body for its ability to play a part in becoming testosterone. So if you have a lot of testosterone, that means you're using a good amount of the cholesterol in your body. That's keeping things in balance from a fat metabolism standpoint as well. So because of its role in reducing inflammation and promoting growth, it has a protective effect from the inflammatory aspect of things, making sure that our beta cells aren't, subjected to too much inflammation. But it's also improving our body's receptiveness for the circulating insulin. So it's really, really important. And it shows up in people with diabetes because low T has huge correlations with the development of type 2 diabetes. And I'm going to hold off on talking about one point because it comes up later. But there's a big difference in testosterone for a healthy human and someone who has diabetes. Coincidence? I think not. So then you've got IGF-1, and this is the partner to insulin. So it functions similarly to insulin, but promotes growth and cellular repair. So it's insulin-like growth factor. So it is anabolic, it is promoting growth, and it is in the name of preservation as well. It's able to repair. And when you think of this from an inflammation standpoint, from a regeneration and a proliferation standpoint, it's ensuring that everything is staying healthy. And you can see that on the graph, right? The more IGF you have in circulation, the better off your beta cell proliferation rates. So stimulates beta cell dedifferentiation and insulin production. So it's keeping beta cells in an active state. It's keeping beta cells active and beta cells, and it is promoting their production of insulin. And you see here at the bottom, it enhances glucose-stimulated insulin secretion through the PI3K-AKT signaling pathway. This is a pathway that gets mentioned a lot in diabetes research just because it is in the name of growth. Growing, whether it be growing beta cells themselves or being an anabolic signal elsewhere that calls for insulin to be used, right? It's important in keeping that insulin signaling alive. And I've done a video at the impact of bee pollen and its ability to possibly promote beta cell proliferation. That had everything to do with the PI3K-AKT signaling pathway. Then you've got HGH, another growth stimulator. Now, this graph looks a little bit different than the other ones, right? You've got, more testosterone, better insulin sensitivity, more IGF, more beta cell proliferation. Those are things we like. But how come with this human growth hormone, the more HGH you have, the worse your glucose regulation gets? Hang on a sec. So this has to do with HGH, human growth hormones, relationship with the other growth hormones, right? So HGH stimulates IGF-1 production in the liver. And that's a huge axis, the HGH IGF-1 axis. It is a call for growth, for repair, for improved metabolism. And it is kind of a regulatory hormone that is keeping fat metabolism in check, increasing fatty acid mobilization for energy, which could potentially paint it as possibly something that's tied with insulin resistance, right? Like if you have too much fat in circulation, you're not going to be very good at using insulin because of insulin's ties to glucose. Just something to think about. And then when you look at the effects on insulin and beta cells, HGH is two-pronged. It has a good side and a not so good side. So it has insulin-like and insulin antagonistic effects depending on the situation. Short term, awesome, right? It's a call for growth. It's calling on IGF-1 and testosterone to do their jobs. It's making sure, it's kind of like a project coordinator, making sure everything is receiving the signals and doing what it's supposed to. However, if it's in effect too long or at too high of a level, it can actually increase or induce insulin resistance. And it has a little bit to do with that fat mobilization as well as just depleting resources. Because there is a sweet spot. There is a sweet spot. Think of HGH as the boss of a construction site, right? It's kind of like the project manager telling everybody, hey, you do this, you do this, you do this. IGF-1 is the skilled worker. IGF-1's getting that signal from HGH. Hey, listen, beta cell growth, beta cell survival. Boom, on it, boss, going to do it. With the right balance of the, hey, I need this, hey, I can do that. Perfect. Everything's working a lot. But if you have too much HGH and not enough IGF, you've got more calls for action than you do workers to do that action. So this leads to some inefficiencies. And some of the effects of HGH start to outweigh the benefits of IGF-1, fat mobilization and metabolism being one of them. So if you have too high HGH and not enough IGF-1 to meet the demands of that HGH, insulin resistance starts to come into play. And that's when that's not such a good thing. And then with too little of either IGF-1 or HGH, the beta cells aren't getting the proper growth signals, right? If you just don't have any growth signals, that's not good either. So there's a lot of synergy to answer that question that we had when we first started talking here about, are they interdependent? They absolutely are. Testosterone and IGF work together. Testosterone enhances IGF-1's signaling, boosting muscle and glucose metabolism, because if you have enough testosterone, you don't have a lot of fat accumulation. You don't have a lot of extra inflammation. In addition to testosterone being a call for growth in and of itself. So testosterone is making sure that IGF-1 has like a smooth runway to do what it needs to do. You've got HGH and IGF-1. Too much of one, not enough of the other, the job doesn't get done. Either you've got a boss asking for something it doesn't have the workers to do, or you've got all these workers with no boss to tell them what to do. And then when you lose on testosterone and insulin sensitivity, you've got an increased inflammation and a decreased call for growth. So you've got inflammation attacking those beta cells, and you've got a lack of call for what may be some quieted beta cells that need that call to action in order to activate and release insulin. And now let's think about quickly the signals or the signaling pathways and the organ systems that are responsible for, they serve as like the field of play for all of these hormones to do what they're supposed to do. The liver being one of them. Now, IGF-1 comes from the liver. But HGH comes from the pituitary gland, testosterone comes from the testes. But the liver is like this mixing ground of all of these things because of its role in the endocrine system as a whole. The liver makes its own hormones. It's kind of always in communication with the rest of these endocrine glands. So if the liver isn't able to do what it's needed to do from a detoxification standpoint, from a metabolic standpoint, from a nutrition, storage, and utilization standpoint, things start to go awry. So if your liver can't do what it's supposed to do, it's not going to be able to make as much IGF-1 that is needed. So this is reducing that beta cell growth and opens the door for increased HGH, which when it doesn't have IGF-1, it increases insulin resistance. Second point here, you have high SHBG, and SHBG is sex hormone binding globulin. And this is something that deactivates or binds to and neutralizes the sex hormones, whether it be testosterone or estrogen. But if you have high sex hormone binding globulin, that means any testosterone you have in circulation is going to get bound. And if it's bound, it can't do what it's supposed to do. So it's the same as not having enough testosterone. And then if you've got that, if you don't have enough IGF-1, you have that, it throws off the HGH IGF-1 ratio. And so you're losing that call for growth and the protection that beta cells need. So how do we improve liver health? Optimizing protein intake. Protein has a big part in promoting growth, just because amino acids are the building blocks for new tissue. When you have those raw materials start to present themselves, that can kind of serve as impetus to start those growth cascades and get the ball rolling again. This could be collagen, glycine, methionine. Those are specific to liver detoxification. There's plenty of other important amino acids that help. L-theanine is one of them. There's a bunch, but you need to make sure that your liver has what it needs to both repair itself so that it can function, and it's getting the right signals to be able to do what it needs to do. Too much fructose and too much alcohol, for obvious reasons, can impact the liver's ability to do what it needs to do. So you need to make sure that you are not over-consuming fructose, not over-consuming or consuming. I'm not big on alcohol anyway, but not drinking too many of them because they can impede your liver's ability to do what it needs to do. And then ways to support bile flow, right? The biliary system is huge for the liver. The liver makes bile, and bile is important for fat metabolism. It's important for waste management within the body and getting things excreted that don't belong in the body. There's plenty of natural ways to improve bile flow. Milk thistle, dandelion root, taurine, tudka, those are all big in getting more bile and making sure that bile is flowing efficiently. I've talked about the liver and gallbladder flush I've done that has a lot to do with improving bile flow as well. Then gut health, right? Whenever I think of diabetes, I think of improving gut health. I think of improving liver health. So with gut dysfunction, it's going to impact your signaling. We've talked before about how gut health and GLP-1 activation, release, receptors, that's all a result of imbalanced gut microbiome. It's not isolated to just GLP-1. It impacts our growth hormones as well. So if we have gut imbalances, it's decreasing our IGF-1 signaling, which has the impacts it has. Slower tissue repair, beta cell dysfunction, more inflammation, right? So if we have too much inflammation, that can impact testosterone, which is going to increase our metabolic stress because you've got too much inflammation and it's suppressing testosterone, which is being used to suppress more inflammation, right? So it's just kind of like taken over by storm. And then you are also disrupting the HGH response. So you're not being able to recover. It basically knocks out the entire signaling cascade. So your growth factors aren't able to do what they need to do. Ways to improve our gut health. Fiber and prebiotics, fermented foods, resistant starches to support gut bacteria, right? Your bacteria need to be able to eat the right things to create the right things for our body to respond to. You can support GLP-1 production with things like berberine, inulin. Psyllium husks are a great source of prebiotics that help the healthy bacteria do what they need to do, and any sort of polyphenols. So antioxidants in general are going to help decrease the inflammation and allow a healthy healing response to actually take place. And then obviously processed foods for obvious reasons, right? They're kind of feeding the bad bacteria and taking away the good. So here you have it. Lower IGF, you've got more sex hormone binding globulin, which is taking out testosterone, which is increasing inflammation. You've got gut dysbiosis, which is increasing the creation of endotoxins, fermenting foods in the gut. It is creating more inflammation, lowering testosterone, impacting HGH secretion and IGF-1 activation. I'm just gonna let you sit with this slide for a little bit just so that you can look at it. It's bad news. You need to make sure that you're taking care of your liver, and you need to make sure that you're taking care of your gut. What I do want to focus on here is breaking the cycle and the fact that all of the things listed here are in your refrigerator right now. Gut liver detox pathways. So sulforaphane, that's in broccoli, among other cruciferous vegetables. But sulforaphane is an important plant compound that has a lot of prebiotic abilities, a lot of anti-inflammatory abilities. It's just a good thing to have. Taurine, glycine, N-acetylcysteine, which is a precursor to glutathione, which is the body's strongest natural antioxidant. Super important. Probiotics, prebiotics, again, you need to make sure that your gut has the bacteria it needs and that the bacteria has the food it needs to sustain itself within your gut. Bile flow, gut motility, make sure that you're moving. Exercise has a lot to do with your gut motility and how food moves through your system. And there's interplay between fasting, giving your body time away from food, away from digestion, so that it can actually process its own healing systems as opposed to just processing and extracting things from food. And as a result of that, it can impact growth factors along the way. So plenty of questions to think about coming out of that section. It was very dense. So if you need to kind of like take a break, I don't blame you. But given what we've learned now, can optimizing testosterone and or IGF-1 improve beta cell health? Pro-growth, anti-inflammatory, we're giving the call for growth, we're activating, and we're taking away inflammation, which is kind of like killing off beta cells. I think it's a good thing. Does HGH therapy have a future role in metabolic health or beta cell regeneration? That depends, right? Because if we just overload ourselves on HGH without paying attention to our IGF-1 and testosterone pathways, it could be disastrous, because if we have too much HGH and not enough IGF-1, we're just promoting insulin resistance the whole time. And then if testosterone, IGF-1, and HGH decline naturally with age, does this contribute to worsening insulin resistance over time? Maybe. I'm not even bought in on the dogmas around aging. I guess this is just getting older. Well, it's like, yeah, maybe it's just getting older if you're not giving your body what it's calling for. So if we live a life and consume the foods that are going to promote longevity from a growth factor standpoint, which no one is really doing effectively, I don't think that has to worsen insulin resistance over time, but something to sit on. Could natural or therapeutic means of improving these hormones help type 1 diabetes patients? Yes. Again, I'm always going to lean towards natural, but if you are interested in kind of like the pharmaceutical route, therapy, whatever, you need to be mindful of the systems you're impacting. And you need to make sure that all of your ducks are in a row so that when you do receive any sort of treatment, you have the means to handle it safely and effectively to get the most out of what you're getting. So I don't think there's any doubt that cleaning your liver, cleaning your gut, and promoting these growth factors is a good thing no matter where you are on the diabetes spectrum, whether you're newly diagnosed type 1 or 20, 30, 40 years down the road.
So now that we've got our introduction to these growth factors, what they do and how they interact with each other, we also get to see the tissues and organ systems that they rely on to maximize their effectiveness. So now in this next section, let's go ahead and take everything that we've learned about the growth factors themselves, as well as considering those tidbits on the adaptability and plasticity of beta cells, and transpose that over the diabetes model.
All right, so now we're going to touch on the two sides of the timeline coin for hormones and type 1 diabetes development. How does having type 1 diabetes impact altered hormones? And then we'll get to how might altered hormones impact the development of diabetes? Because there's what's happening before and there's what's happening after, and we need to make sure that we understand both to know where we are and how we can prevent it in the future. So again, this is just kind of an intro slide. these are some of the questions that we need to be thinking going into this next section. So type 1 diabetes, because of the lack of insulin, is going to disrupt the balance of anabolic, which is growth, and catabolic, which is breaking down hormones. Testosterone, we need it for growth. And if we don't have it, we're more susceptible to inflammation and less growth. IGF-1, HGH, we need to make sure that they're in balance to make sure that we aren't taking on more insulin resistance and we're able to effectively call for those growth factors, those protection factors. And then the discussion point, like I mentioned before, are these hormonal changes a consequence of diabetes development? Like, is it diabetes first and then the hormones? Or could they be a contributing factor in disease development? Where do they fall on the timeline of this all? So let's make sure my head's not in the way. The impact of insulin deficiency on growth hormone regulation. And when I say growth hormone, I mean growth factors, kind of all three of these. I know that when I say HGH, that's human growth hormone. When I say growth hormones, it's the trifecta: testosterone, IGF, HGH. So the missing factor, so it seems, in the proper regulation and utilization of these three growth factors is insulin. And when you lose insulin, you're missing a major piece in how these three work together and their desired effects on the body. So when testosterone decreases, you get less androgen production. Androgen is just like another term for anabolic hormones. Growth, like more calls for growth in the body. You're losing muscle, you're taking on more visceral fat, metabolism as a whole slows down. Less IGF-1. So when you have less IGF-1, the signaling weakens both beta cell survival and the calls for growth, right? Because a loss of insulin is kind of signaling to our body, if you remember in those first slides, where it's like, if you're in a low metabolic time, not a lot going on, those beta cells quiet down. And so when you lose insulin, those pathways are taking that as a sign of low metabolic activity. And then it kind of shuts down all of the growth, the calls for growth. But interestingly enough, here at the bottom, you see HGH actually increases. So this may be kind of like the red alarm system where, okay, beta cells are dying off. All of the things where, all of the mechanisms that we have in place to be like, hey, listen, you know, we're losing stuff and we need to start that growth. That's HGH coming online being like, hey guys, the boss coming into the office, we got to start working. But lo and behold, we have no workers to get it done. Testosterone's fallen off, IGF-1 has fallen off, and we have this HGH, which is just now working against itself because it's calling on fat and increasing insulin resistance. And I've illustrated that a little bit over here in this graph. So you've got insulin, it's supporting testosterone, which is going to enhance metabolic balance. You've got insulin, which is increasing IGF-1, which supports metabolic balance. You've got insulin, which is going to actually suppress HGH to keep it in that Goldilocks zone where we don't have too much. And if it can't do that, if you knock insulin out of this equation, if it gets to be too much, then it's throwing off the metabolic balance. Got a neat little graph here. So testosterone levels for people without diabetes and people with diabetes, specifically type 1. Like half, a little over half, right? For non-diabetics and people with type 1. Inflammation is a major player in this. So when you look on the left-hand side, type 1 diabetes is linked to lower testosterone levels, especially in males. I would think because males just typically have more in circulation, so there's more change to be seen. It could have to do with hyperglycemia and the resulting inflammation of hyperglycemia. We all know it kind of creates a mess for the body. The lack of insulin, the lack of call for growth, insulin's an anabolic, disrupts steroidogenesis, the creation of testosterone in testes. High cortisol from metabolic stress further suppresses testosterone. So it's just from multiple directions, all of these things are leading to less testosterone. You've got hyperglycemia, you've got no insulin, no call for growth, and as a result of those two, the body's cortisol skyrockets through the roof, and now we're missing out on that healthy testosterone reaction and cascade. And then, the impacts. What are the impacts of low testosterone? Reduced muscle mass and insulin sensitivity. For anyone who is diagnosed or has been diagnosed, were you big and muscular when you got diagnosed? No, it's a wasting disease. You basically turn into skeleton and bones. So it's just, it's a tough cascade to work around because, again, there are so many factors working against you there. Higher fat accumulation leading to worsened metabolic outcomes, increased fatigue, and lowered energy. So, it's like, reduced muscle mass. Bowie, you just said you were skin and bones. That's kind of advanced, pre-diagnosis. But if you have low testosterone, and again, as we see type 1 diabetes get diagnosed more and more in older people, it's not just a child's disease anymore. You start to, what is it? Half of America, half of the US is obese at this point. So it's like we are accumulating fat at a very high rate. And I'm willing to bet this has something to do with the loss of insulin, proper insulin signaling, and the improper management of these growth hormones. And then fatigue, feeling tired. From a diabetic standpoint, okay, yes, you clearly don't have insulin, which is, allowing glucose to enter your cell, but testosterone plays a huge part in metabolic efficiency and being able to use it well, insulin sensitivity and all of that. So it's a multi-pronged impact. And then when you miss out on IGF-1, people with type 1 diabetes don't have a lot of IGF-1. Because of that loss of insulin signaling. Insulin helps IGF-1, insulin growth factor 1, do what it needs to do. So weakened muscle growth and repair, increased insulin resistance due to the loss of IGF-1's metabolic effects, and the resulting increase in HGH. We're missing out on the glucose metabolism, the calls for growth, and the ability to keep the cells alive. So the growth hormone paradox, right? Like, it's hard to have a healthy hormonal profile without insulin in circulation. So, we're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. When we lose out on insulin, HGH is increasing because HGH is the red alarm saying, hey, listen, we need more, we need to grow. Where are my guys getting this going? Radio silence. So you're getting an initial call for growth, but when nobody answers the call, it's adding momentum in the wrong direction. Increased fat breakdown, that's where ketosis and ketoacidosis comes into play. High blood sugar levels, because you're resistant to whatever insulin you have left, and you aren't able to effectively use energy. So all of the cells that need energy are starting to die off. and just beating the dead horse here, you got to have insulin, right? When you have on this right hand side here, insulin has a direct impact on all of these growth factors and their relationship with each other. So if you cut out insulin from each of these, the relationship between each one is going all over the place. Low T, less muscle, less insulin sensitivity. Low IGF-1, beta cells are not protected, and they're not being called to action, and they're not being protected, so they're more susceptible to the inflammation. So that's one of the reasons why it's like, you give people insulin and it's like they're like breathing life again, because now you're starting, oh my God, these growth factors, the repair, the cell repair and everything can be kind of regulated again. What would happen if you use both insulin therapy and those targeted hormonal interventions? What happens then? And like I said, there's levels to all of it, right? You need to make sure that all of the organ systems that are required to process these hormones are working properly too. So it's not just like, oh, take testosterone and insulin and be better. It's like, no, you need to make sure that your body and your diet is in line to support that. And should we explore IGF-1 boosting strategies to support beta cell health? Yes, absolutely we should. In my humble non-medical professional opinion. So, would normalizing testosterone, IGF-1, and HGH levels help in type 1 diabetes management? Why wouldn't it? Why wouldn't it? There's, like I mentioned before, there's layers to it, right? So when you say, oh, what does normalizing testosterone, IGF-1, and HGH actually mean? Like, for me in my house right now, what can I do to normalize these? A lot of people's minds, when they hear this, they go to, okay, well, I just inject IGF-1, just inject testosterone, regulate my HGH levels. How can I do it right now? Take care of the systems responsible for using and regulating those things. That's step one. Clean out the gunk. Make sure that your body can actually handle it. Then you can start to explore ways to preferably naturally increase your body's ability. And then you can start to think about maybe synthetic ways or alternative ways outside of that natural realm to complement insulin therapy. And then our current insulin therapy is missing an opportunity to address these imbalances. Yes, because we're not paying attention to the systems involved in the creation of these growth factors. So it's like, oh, insulin makes everything better, but we haven't really improved the original blockages or the existing or pre-existing imbalances or the reasons behind those imbalances that led to the loss of beta cells to begin with, right? So we're putting a Band-Aid on a bullet hole. And then should we be studying IGF-1 based therapies more aggressively for beta cell preservation? I think it's definitely worth looking into, especially for those who are newly diagnosed. But again, if you're not cleaning out your liver, again, you're just asking to be on another therapy because you haven't done anything to actually address the underlying issue. But definitely something worth thinking about.
So if we look at it from a hormone reflection after the development of diabetes, the loss of insulin has major implications for testosterone, which is going to influence your body composition, which is going to influence your insulin sensitivity and inflammation. And the loss of IGF-1, it's just really, really devastating. That human growth hormone is increasing, which on the surface sounds good, but it doesn't have anything to communicate with, right? It's a mediator for growth. And if it doesn't have anything to do its bidding, it ends up doing not so great things.
All right, so now let's look at the opposite side of that coin. We covered the diabetes first, hormonal imbalance after. Now let's focus on what's going on in our hormones as type 1 diabetes begins to develop, right? So there is some evidence of IGF-1 and HGH changing in those preclinical stages of type 1 diabetes. We've got to consider testosterone's role in modulating inflammation and the fact that inflammation is one of the things that is ramping up in preclinical type 1 diabetes. And with how the needs of insulin increase in times of great metabolic demand, how do those times of our life where we are in a very high metabolic demand, how are those periods of time impacting beta cell growth and regeneration and the growth hormones attached to them? Thinking about puberty here, and we'll talk a little bit about that in this section here. Puberty, growth spurts, those are times of high insulin need. So when we are in a state where we're predisposed to not having the tools needed to supply those growth factors, we might be setting ourselves up for disaster. So could hormonal imbalances act as an accomplice to or an early warning system for impending beta cell failure? So let's think about the early hormonal changes before type 1 diabetes. So in testosterone, there are some studies that show low testosterone in the young males prior to type 1 diabetes. Now, they don't have a lot of studies for testosterone. I don't know if they have any studies in testosterone in women before they develop type 1 diabetes, but it's not, that doesn't negate the influence of testosterone for both men and women. Women, you need to have healthy testosterone metabolism. You need to be able to have testosterone, just not as much as men. And it's, has similar, not the exact same profile that it does in men, but it is still a growth factor and you still need it to have a healthy metabolism. So it's still worth paying attention to. With that low testosterone, could that increase inflammation and metabolic stress, making beta cells more vulnerable? For IGF-1, low IGF-1 in preclinical type 1 diabetes. Not a coincidence. So IGF-1, the one protecting beta cells and giving them the signal to grow, either could play a part in the autoimmune attack, right? It might just leave them more vulnerable to an attack. It might be what opens the gate for any pre-existing inflammation to do what it's doing, right? We don't know exactly how that cascade, that order of operations is working. And then for HGH levels fluctuate erratically in pre-diabetic individuals, possibly contributing to insulin resistance before full-blown diabetes develops, right? So it's like we're on the road and we're swerving back and forth trying to regain control to stay on the road. And HGH, with the liver dysfunction and our gut health like slowly declining, we're having fewer and fewer workers on the floor to do the bidding of the calls for growth that HGH is calling for, and it's just a slow, steady decline. And on this graph here, you see the differences here. The greater this is, okay, boom. Once it reaches a point where you just don't have enough protection or calls for growth, and you're building insulin resistance at the same time, and that's when type 1 diabetes starts to happen. And with just the information on this slide, you have to consider very strongly that there's a lot going on before the development of diabetes, and it's not just like, okay, boom, diabetes, now the hormones go crazy. Now, this is where we get into a little bit of a gray area. Now, with this chart, I put this star here on purpose. I had these graphs created using AI. This is one that it made, and it has it. It gave its sources. It gave all of that. This is one where I was like, I don't know if I agree with this, only from the type 1 diabetes risk standpoint, this black line, because I looked separately and I found a number of sources who said that there is a dual peak age of type 1 diabetes development. There is kind of like the 7 to 9 area, 7 to 9 years old. I was diagnosed at 8. And then you have like the 12 to 15 as being another one. And I thought that was, you have two, and this graph doesn't accurately represent that. It may, this black line may boost again over here, but for demonstration's sake, let's just think about from puberty, from this like, okay, I'm about to enter a growth stage or I'm in the middle of a growth stage. Think of the relationship between insulin demand and the role that hormones play in that. Okay, so don't take this graph for absolute truth. Simply a demonstration. There's just gray areas here, and I would just hang with me here as we go through it. So many type 1 diabetes cases are diagnosed during puberty when hormones fluctuate dramatically. HGH spikes significantly during puberty, right? That's the maestro being like, hey, I need growth here, I need growth here, I need growth here. And it can increase insulin resistance if it doesn't have the workers it needs, IGF-1 and testosterone. Testosterone levels rise in males, possibly modulating immune activity and affecting beta cell survival. So you've got a lot of testosterone in play. How does testosterone's influence change if there's a lot of pre-existing inflammation? Is it dampened? Is it not able to do what it's needed to do as effectively? And then IGF-1 levels peak during puberty, but may be disrupted in those at risk for type 1 diabetes. So we may just have a muted growth factor response. And I will say this anecdotally for myself. Again, I was diagnosed at 8. So for anyone diagnosed before puberty, think about where you were in relation to puberty. So if you're 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, that's like the beginning signs of impending growth, right? That's the body being like, hey, listen, growth is on the horizon here. We've got to make sure we've got our ducks in a row. And if you are predisposed, whether it be genetically, environmentally, what have you, that you may be unstable enough already for that to be enough to throw you out of whack. For myself and my personal puberty experience, I was a very late bloomer. I probably didn't really see the impacts of puberty until I was like 16, 17, and really fully realized until 18, which is super late. And I wasn't thinking of puberty and diabetes when I was in puberty. I was just interested in puberty. But I don't think that's a coincidence, because I would say if I could go back and test for those things as I was growing up, I would be willing to bet that I was very low in testosterone, very low in IGF-1 in those formative years of like 10 to 16, 17, 18. And the reason I was so late in, kind of crescendoing puberty was because of diabetes and the lack of insulin response. So just food for thought. And if you are someone who is on the other side of puberty, going through puberty now, or about to enter into puberty, these are things to look back on and think about while you're in it, making sure that you have what you need to be able to use those growth factors properly to make sure that you are growing in a healthy way. So growth hormones and immune system activation here. So testosterone's role in immune regulation, it is an immune modulator. It reduces autoimmunity risk, right? It handles inflammation. It's making sure that because with all of this new growth, this new tissue, you need to make sure that the immune system, the thymus, our own autoimmunity, we've got a lot more tissue, a lot more, bones, muscle, more hormones, different cascades and stuff that needs to be labeled. Is this safe or is it not? Testosterone is something that ensures that everything is labeled properly. And if it's not there, maybe some of that new stuff contains activated hormones, receptors, or whatever that are recognized as foe instead of friend, and that kind of leans into the autoimmunity aspect. IGF-1 again is protection. It is making sure that the cells that are regenerated are safe, healthy, and active. And in that way, they're kind of anti-inflammatory anyway. So if you're low on IGF-1, you don't have that added line of defense against autoimmunity. And then obviously HGH. It's screaming at the top of its lungs that it wants to grow, it needs to grow. And if it doesn't have someone there to listen to it, it ends up working against itself. So if you're going through puberty, you feel like you're someone who's at risk for developing diabetes, pay attention to these things, right? Was your puberty abnormal? Timeline, symptoms. There may have been something going on with your growth hormones. It may be worth looking at your hormone screening just for information's sake. Maybe you're already diagnosed. It's worth finding out more about what your levels are so that you can use that as a baseline and see if you are improving in the therapies that you're going through to see if you're seeing improvement or not. So definitely worth looking into alternative ways to improve proper growth. And we'll talk about that in the next section, right? Because growth hormones might be the missing link in this is type 1 prediction. I think it's prevention, not just prediction, but prevention, right? Do growth hormones imbalances contribute to beta cell vulnerability? Without a doubt. I don't have a doubt. Is puberty a stress test that reveals underlying type 1 diabetes risk? I would reframe that as, is puberty the call for growth that our body is not in a position to answer in a healthy way? And if it's not, that may put our body in protection mode where it is succumbing to the inflammation it's already experiencing, and it's silencing the beta cells in an effort to protect them and preventing them from making more insulin. Should we be considering monitoring hormone levels as a part of type 1 diabetes risk assessment? I think it's just general health. I think it should be part of general health. From an external, like, does my child look healthy in their prepubescent and pubescent ages? Are they exhibiting all of the signs that we kind of associate with traditional coming of age? Are they not? It helps to have numbers to look at to see if it's going. And then with that information, can we use that to see early intervention? And then to really know what to double down on from a system standpoint, from a nutrition standpoint, to prevent it from getting worse. And if there is anything going on, reversing it and getting us back to a point of balance and harmony.
Now, this is also interesting to me because I've never connected the dots between the onset of diabetes and the onset of the hormonal changes that are preceding adolescence and becoming teenagers. And the more I think about it, the less of a coincidence it is. So, from my personal history, I was diagnosed at 8 years old, which to most people, it's like, well, you're not really in puberty yet. That's too early for that. But not really when you think of the slow buildup to the crescendo that you think of when you think of adolescence and the teen years. And having been diagnosed so early with the loss of insulin and the downstream effects on growth factors, I hit puberty very late. I didn't start to experience any of those things until I was like 15, late 15, 16, 17. So it really delayed my progress into puberty. And I'm curious if anyone else experienced something like that, but it was just, it rung a lot of bells for me. Funny enough, in the post production of this episode, I realized that what I had filmed went over the allotted time that the software I use to edit these podcasts allows. So I had to split it. This will be the first part of the growth hormone episode. You'll have to go to episode 49 to get the finishing touches of everything. So this episode has become dedicated to learning more about what the growth hormones are, what they do, how they work together. We've recovered and learned some new aspects about beta cells, their adaptability to the metabolic demands of the body. We have reconsidered the timeline of diabetes development, whether it be diabetes impacting our hormones after diagnosis, as well as pre-diagnosis, what is our hormonal situation doing in the development of type 1 diabetes. So that's what episode 48 is going to be about. Episode 49 is going to be dedicated to what can we do about it? What are natural ways to boost our growth hormone health, and what can we do for the systems to properly align to allow for healthy beta cells to regrow, proliferate, and sustain life?
So there is a lot going on here. Hormones, beta cells, their impacts on our metabolism, how that factors into our nervous system, and any relationship you think one thing has on the other, the reverse is also true. Our metabolism is impacting our beta cells. Our nervous system is impacting our hormones. No street is a one-way street. We'll let Jackie take it from here. Growth factors are more than just hormones. They're metabolic regulators. They are part of a much larger scheme impacting systems all over the place. They regulate glucose. They control inflammation. They control insulin release. They work together. They don't even work in isolation. They work together to make sure that the body is getting everything that it needs. Beta cells are not static. They're not just like, oh, I'm a beta cell, I make insulin. It's like, well, what does the body need? I can be a beta cell that waits for the call to release insulin when it's needed. I can be a beta cell that goes away and doesn't come back. I can be a beta cell that's on all the time and giving you insulin if you need it. We have to realize the ebb and flow of our metabolism and the demands it makes on our beta cells and our beta cells' reaction to those demands. And what are the things that we can do to influence that, right? How can we in our life, what we eat and how we live our lives, how can we rise and fall to meet those demands? And where do we go from here, right? We want more growth factors, albeit in the right combination and in the right timing. What more do we have to learn about all of these interpersonal relationships, hormones, growth factors, immunity, beta cell health, the organ systems responsible for handling all of these? And once we find what those systems are, where does my current system fall within that framework, and what can I do to improve it, to modify it? So what we've learned: beta cells are capable of regeneration without a doubt, but they need the right conditions. These growth factors are an important part in facilitating those conditions: insulin function, metabolism, and managing inflammation. Type 1 diabetes is more than just an insulin problem. It is a systemic, whether it be metabolism, whether it be our immune system, our gut, our liver. It all plays a role in this altered glucose metabolism. And there's no doubt, number 4, that lifestyle changes, nutrition, exercise, stress management can influence growth factors and beta cell survival. And we need to take the overlooked aspects of nervous system regulation and natural hormone balance and make them adequately looked aspects of type 1 diabetes care. So for those who maybe are predisposed to type 1 diabetes or have just found out that they have type 1 diabetes, what can you do to help better regulate your growth hormones, your growth factors? What can you do to find out where you are and what you need, and what can you do to address those to improve your beta cell outcomes? Should exercise and stress management be prioritized as much as insulin therapy? I mean, everyone just kind of assumes, well, insulin therapies, of course. But then when it comes to exercise and stress management, they're like, well, that's context dependent. That depends. I think both. I think you have to step on the gas for both in those initial stages to make sure that your body has what it needs to do what it needs to do. Are there overlooked natural compounds that could enhance beta cell health? Yes, and we are opening our eyes to what those are, how accessible those are, and we're starting to take action and see the results. And it's good. And it is very good. And so what's the next step in understanding type 1 diabetes from a whole body perspective? What's next? I think it's fun. I think it's exciting. And I can't thank you enough for being here. This is episode 48. I cannot believe it. 48. I'm glad that I've kept the conversation going in the way that I had. I'm handing the baton off to you, still while running my own race, but handing the baton off to you. We have to keep this conversation alive with whoever will listen. Whoever has the ears for the words and thoughts and the ideas that you have, share it. Drop your question. But if it is with me, please talk to me. I want to see where you're at, what you're experiencing. I want to know what you're trying and the results that you're experiencing. You have to share what's going on. If you know someone who could benefit from what I've just talked about, share this. Like, comment, subscribe, all the things. Make sure that this conversation stays alive. This YouTube channel here, I've got a Discord as well. I'll have a link for that in the description. All of the ways that you can support the channel, whether it be affiliate links with companies that I use and trust, it'll all be in the description. Again, my name is Bowie Madison. This is episode 48 of Diabetics for Diabetics Radio. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you next time.